Viking are amazing warriors. They came from the frozen north, fierce, fearless, and unstoppable. With axes that could split shields and ships that conquered seas, the Vikings became legends of war. But what truly made them so powerful? Was it their weapons, their strategy, or something deeper, a belief that death itself was just the beginning? Few names evoke the imagination as much as the Vikings when we consider warriors who have made a lasting impression on history. With their axe, sword, and unwavering bravery, these Norse seafarers, both men and women, carved out their legend as masters of battle, in addition to being raiders and explorers. They travelled over the oceans from the frozen fjords of Scandinavia, bringing fear and wonder to the hearts of nations ranging from Byzantium to England. But why were they such strong combatants? Their unparalleled adaptability, ferocious culture, craftsmanship, and command of land and water hold the key to the solution. Let's explore Viking combat in depth to learn what made these warriors so amazing and why, even after a millennium, their legacy remains. Adaptable weapons and fighting techniques. The Vikings were clever, smart, and adaptive warriors who were much more than mindless raiders. Their fighting style changed over time to accommodate nearly any situation, from precision long-range clashes to vicious close-quarters fights. Viking warriors trained in a variety of weapons and tactics, in contrast to professional troops of later times. Although they were proficient with axes, swords, spears, and shields, they were also capable of engaging in unarmed warfare when needed. In the confusion of combat, they frequently engaged in grappling, shoving, tripping, and wrestling, which enabled them to overpower opponents with their strength and agility. The most recognizable Viking weapon was the axe, a straightforward yet extremely effective instrument. A good axe might scare enemies, shatter armor, and split shields. It had both practical and martial value because it also served as a daily utility tool. But the sword was a mark of ability and prestige. Viking swords, forged by expert blacksmiths, were frequently precisely balanced for thrusting and slicing. Many were exquisitely made, often handed down through the years, with elaborate hilts and steel that was pattern welded. However, the Vikings didn't stop there. They skillfully used spears for thrusting and throwing, which gave them flexibility and range. Some were armed with bows and arrows, which enabled them to confront adversaries before gaining ground. Their shields were active weapons that they used to move, hook, and batter enemies, in addition to being defensive equipment. Viking battle was dynamic and fluid due to this offense-defense combination, which favoured both individual skill and collective tactics. Their adaptability allowed them to battle in formation on an open field, defend a castle, or launch a lightning-fast raid, giving them an advantage in practically every circumstance. The Academy of Viking Martial Arts claims that their varied fighting style was essential to their flexibility, enabling them to react swiftly to the difficulties presented by strange places and a wide range of adversaries. Good protection and armor when they could afford it. Another area where the Vikings struck a balance between creativity and practicality was armor. The notion that all Vikings wore horned helmets or fought bare-chested was created by later romanticized art. However, this is not true. Although the quality of their armor frequently depended on their personal fortune or level of success on the battlefield, many Viking warriors were actually well protected. The only complete Viking helmet ever recovered is the Geirmundbu helmet, which was uncovered in Norway and provides important information about their craftsmanship. It was made of iron with a protective nose guard and a rounded cap. It was the ideal combination of form and function, intended to provide both protection and visibility. Even the most basic helmets, composed of iron or leather that had been hardened, provided a great deal of protection from sword strikes. When it came to bodily protection, the wealthiest Vikings could wear byrnie or chainmail shirts, which offered superior protection from slashing blows. With thousands of interlocking rings, mail armor was meticulously crafted by hand and frequently worn over leather or padded linen clothing to absorb impact. However, leather armor or heavy layered garments were used by less wealthy fighters, which still offered some protection. Each Viking carried a shield, which was essential for both individual and collective protection. Shields, which were usually round and composed of wood with a metal boss in the middle, were both big enough to protect the body and light enough to move around. Warriors employed them actively, pushing and striking to make openings. They were not passive tools. The Viking Herald claims that even the most basic Viking defences were made with functionality in mind, even though armour differed according to social standing. Mobility, which was vital for warriors who frequently fought on rough terrain or in swift raids, was never sacrificed for protection. Tactical intelligence, positioning, velocity, and approach. The Vikings were intelligent in addition to being powerful. They used cunning strategy and organisation in addition to raw force to achieve their victories throughout Europe and beyond. Vikings used formations such as the shield wall, skjaldborg, in which fighters locked their shields edge to edge to create an almost impassable barrier. When fighting in groups, they were able to move forward gradually while defending their fellows thanks to this formation's exceptional effectiveness against arrows and horse charges. The boar's snout, svinfylking, another formation, was a wedge-shaped attack that concentrated force at one location to breach enemy lines. Smaller Viking parties were able to infiltrate larger armies and cause havoc among their own ranks thanks to this tactical advancement. However, formations were only one aspect of their plan. The Vikings were experts in speed and surprise, which is the skill of attacking foes when and where they least expect it. Their raids frequently coincided precisely with the weather, seasons, and tides. They arrived quickly, raided settlements, and fled before sizable defence troops could assemble, using rivers and beaches as highways. This was greatly aided by their ships. The Vikings could suddenly arrive hundreds of miles inland because longships could navigate on both broad oceans and shallow rivers. Their psychological warfare was just as effective as their swords, and they occasionally battled for shock, fright, and loot rather than territory. Viking raids were strategic, well-planned, and extremely effective, as history.com points out. When they faced slower, less flexible opponents, their timing and movement gave them the advantage. A warrior culture, fearlessness, faith, and mentality. The Vikings' mentality was maybe their greatest asset, not their weapons or strategies. Viking culture extolled bravery, fortitude, and tenacity. Those who died with honour were thought to have been selected by Odin to reach Valhalla, the hall of the deceased, where they would fight and feast eternally. A warrior who showed courage in combat could gain respect, fame, and fortune. Their fighting fearlessness was inspired by this belief system. For a Viking, dying was a springboard to greatness rather than a conclusion. Because they frequently fought heedlessly and were not afraid to die, as long as they could meet their demise with a weapon in hand, they were extremely dangerous opponents. They included the fabled berserkers, fighters who were claimed to go into a trance-like rage when engaged in combat. They fought with superhuman power and fury, channeling the spirit of wolves or bears while wearing animal skins. The psychological impact was evident, even though contemporary historians question how accurate these descriptions were. Seeing an enemy wailing like a beast that doesn't seem to feel pain could destroy morale before a single blow is delivered. Viking warfare was as much about intimidation as it was about competence, as the Viking Herald describes. Their fierce charges, loud war cries, and fearsome reputations frequently led opponents to split up before the battle even started. This warrior mindset was useful in addition to being cultural. It brought Viking communities together, encouraged loyalty, and made sure that they stayed proud and unflappable even in the face of defeat. Few armies could match their inner strength, which sprang from their faith in glory and fate. Masters of the sea, mobility, and seafaring skills. The longship was the Vikings' engine of power, if the sword was their emblem. The Viking Age might not have occurred if it weren't for their ships. Long, slender, and flexible, these boats were technological wonders of their era, designed to glide across shallow rivers and cut through waves. Vikings exploited their maritime skills for exploration, trade, and colonization in addition to raiding. They extended to North Africa in the south, the Middle East in the east, and North America in the west. They were unpredictable due of their movement. Once the dragon-headed prows emerged on the horizon, no coast was secure. This mobility proved crucial in times of conflict. Vikings had the ability to assault with little notice, strike far into enemy territory, and then quickly retreat. They were able to explore areas that others believed were inaccessible since their ships were light enough to be transported over land when needed. For ages, they ruled over rivers and seas throughout Europe thanks to their proficiency in mobility and navigation, according to history.com. The same vessels that frightened English monasteries also transported people to Greenland, Iceland, and other places. In addition to being warriors, the Vikings were also traders and explorers, and their combination of anger and adventure made them unstoppable. Technical proficiency and craftsmanship. Great craftsmanship is the foundation of every great fighter. The Vikings used highly developed skills and inventiveness to create their ships, armor, and weapons. True artists, Viking blacksmiths were experts in both design and metallurgy. Consider the fabled Ulfberht swords, which were so sophisticated that they astounded contemporary metallurgists. These swords were made from steel that was so pure that it would take generations for it to be remade in Europe. They were robust, flexible, and extremely sharp. They have even been dubbed the medieval equivalent of a high-tech brand by some archaeologists. Axes were also thoughtfully made, with thin blades for balance and speed, but robust enough to tear shields or helmets. Their shields were light and sturdy, frequently painted with vibrant colours or emblems that represented clan identity, and their spears were frequently weighted for thrusting or throwing. Even armour was cleverly made for movement and functionality, while less elaborate than later medieval plate armour. The Viking Herald claims that Viking fighters knew how to strike a balance between speed and protection, crafting equipment that was appropriate for their purposes out of materials like leather, iron, and layered fabric. They were also skilled at building ships. A longship's hull could bend with the waves without breaking, since each plank and rivet was placed with a specific function. Their tar or animal fat-treated wool sails were weatherproof and long-lasting. The Vikings had an unparalleled blend of strength, speed, and stamina because to this, technical know-how. As Survival World points out, the Vikings were able to make equipment that were ideal for their environment, which allowed them to do more than just battle. They ruled. Human nature. Not every Viking was superhuman. It's crucial to remember that not all Vikings were legendary heroes in order to maintain historical balance. Diverse people made up the Viking civilization. Some were skilled warriors, while others were farmers, traders, or artisans who engaged in combat when called upon. The quality of equipment differed greatly. A wealthy jarl would have a good sword and a chainmail shirt, while a lesser freeman might only have a wooden shield and an axe. Over the centuries, the Vikings' reputation has also been exaggerated. Their strength, brutality, and supernatural power were exaggerated in the sagas and medieval chronicles that describe them, frequently fusing fiction and reality. But even without legend, the facts are still striking. They were some of the most skilled and versatile fighters of their era. Their demise resulted from change rather than weakness. As Europe developed, raiding became more difficult due to unified kingdoms, standing armies, and walled cities. Vikings eventually made their homes, engaged in trade, and assimilated into the very communities they had previously feared. Thus, it is true that the Vikings were incredibly skilled fighters. They were powerful not only because of their physical prowess, but also because of their adaptability, bravery, discipline, and creativity. They developed better weapons, learned several fighting techniques, traveled farther than any of their peers, and adopted a warrior mentality that made them unafraid of death. They were human beings molded by a tough environment who transformed survival into art and combat into legend. They were neither invincible nor mythical. They continue to have an impact on contemporary culture, from television and literature to martial arts and military tactics. A reminder that greatness in combat requires not just power but also spirit, skill, and courage. The Viking warrior is a representation of tenacity, adaptability, and daring. The Vikings repeatedly demonstrated that they were more than just raiders, whether on the blood-soaked fields of Europe or the storm-tossed seas of the North Atlantic. They were tacticians, explorers, artisans, and most importantly, soldiers whose legacy endures to this day. Were Vikings the greatest warriors of all time? Let us know in the comments below, and please don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.